Then I'll begin by chanting dedication of offerings and the 3 refuges and 5 precepts from the Amaravati chanting book, which I'll share on screen. And you're welcome to join me in taking those if you wish. And then I'll lead a meditation, and I'll introduce whatever comes up for me and invite you to ask questions, and we'll take those questions by you unmuting yourself. But you can send a chat message if you like, but you could also unmute and ask questions when the time comes. So I'll start, as I said, by sharing the screen and the chanting book. To the Blessed One, the Lord who fully attained perfect enlightenment, to the teaching which he expounded so well, and to the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, to these the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, we render with offerings our rightful homage. It is well for us that the Blessed One, having attained liberation, still had compassion for later generations. May these simple offerings be accepted for our long-lasting benefit and for the happiness it gives us. The Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed One, I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. The teaching so completely explained by him, I bow to the Dhamma. The Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, I bow to the Sangha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dhammang saranang gacchāmi, Sangham saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi sangham saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi sangham saranang gacchāmi. Pāṇātipātā vēramani sikkhabhadaṃ samadhiyāmi. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature. Adinnādāna vēramani sikkhabhadaṃ samadhiyāmi. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given. Kāmesu micchāchārā vēramani sikkhabhadaṃ samadhiyāmi. I undertake the precept to refrain from sexual misconduct. Musavāda vēramani sikkhabhadaṃ samadhiyāmi. I undertake the precept to refrain from lying. Surameraya majjappamadhatthana vēramani sikkhabhadaṃ samadhiyāmi. I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness. Imani panchasikha vadani silena sukatimyanti silena bhoga sampada silena niputinyanti tasma silang visodaye. These are the 5 precepts. Virtue is the source of happiness. Virtue is the source of true wealth. Virtue is the source of peacefulness. Therefore let virtue be purified. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Bringing our attention to the experience of our world, however it is. This is that sense of, we say how it is, we say our experience, and bring our attention right into how it is, really. That's, for me, this is how it feels. So how do we do that? We look at body and mind, and bring our attention to the body, to contact that, to make contact with the experience of this, of inhabiting this body. As we bring our attention into the body, then there's a natural straightening, and naturally bring our attention to that point of balance, a sense of being upright and relaxed. With a sense of curiosity as to how that is. So we discover it new every time we sit. How does this body feel in this sitting posture? The sensations that we experience. Deliberately noticing sensations from the top of the head to the toes, the fingers, so that we can bring everything that's connected to this body into awareness. Physical sensations, wherever they're felt. I find it useful to pay deliberate attention, because otherwise I don't notice. So it's helpful to deliberately, methodically work my way down the body. I find it useful. Start from the top of the head and work downwards till I get to the toes. Giving deliberate attention to sensations I can experience. Lingering where there are areas of tension, to make note of those. Receiving tension with kindness and an invitation to release, to let go. We might notice sensations that we don't like. Perhaps anxiety arises. We think that we should do something, push it away, but it shouldn't be like this. But allowing and opening to those areas, just letting our attention rest there and acknowledge, oh, listen to what the body's telling us about that area, not believing and making up a story, but simply listening without interfering. If the body itches here, just notice that. If it's uncomfortable there, just notice it. But being willing to listen to what it has to tell us. Compassionate listening, not interfering, but simply being willing to listen. An acknowledgement, it's like this. At first we name things. We say, that's an itch. We say, that's pain. But then deliberately take the name away, let it go, and see what's left when the name is removed, let go. See what it really is in experience, without words. When we don't have a name for it, all we've got is curiosity. We don't know, but it's still there. We can observe. This way of practicing, of firstly naming and then letting go of the name. We can do that with emotional states, mental states that arise. We notice a mental state, let's say an emotion, we name it so that we can understand. Oh yes, this is what it is. It's aversion or attachment, for example. That helps us understand what's happening in the mind. This is sleepiness, this is restlessness, so we can name it to help us understand it. And then we let go of the name and just rest in the experience. And the sense of wonder to see what it really is. When we experience negative states, we often feel that we should push them away, that they're an obstruction. But far from that, we should let them in. So we can get to know them and feel anxiety. Don't feel like that's a problem, but simply just to notice. Allow it to be named, to be understood, and then let go of the name. What is it, really? Let it run its course. Whatever it is, we don't need to add to the story, but simply to notice the experience. It's a path of sati sampajanya, mindfulness and clearly seeing. So mindfulness is not interfering with, but simply noticing without judging. And sampajanya, that's seeing clearly. So that's what happens when we don't interfere, just observe. We start to see things for what they are, rather than what we would like them to be or believe them to be. There's nothing we need to do, simply to be present. That's enough. Things themselves reveal their own truth to us. We don't need to tell them what they are. we start to notice the commonality of our experience, the commonality of things arising and ceasing, coming and going. The imperfection of things, the impersonality of them. They come and go. And that's what can be clearly seen. That's where truth lies. And this leads to accepting things the way they are. And there's nothing we need to fix in order to accept it. It can be just like this. It takes some letting go, a little bit of letting go, or a lot of letting go. Step by step, we let go of our resistance to the way things are. Ding! 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 Accepting ourselves as we are is a greatest act of kindness. So it's really an act of loving kindness, isn't it? And why wouldn't we? Because after all, it's the way we can't, we in this present moment, the way it is the way it is. There's nothing we can do to change the present moment. It's an inheritance that we have of the past. Whatever past conditions have happened, then in this present moment that we are inheriting that. And so in the present moment, all we have is that experience of accumulated past. And thinking that's not good enough is just creating suffering, the suffering of regret, thinking, oh, it shouldn't be like this. I should be different from the way I am. When we start meditating, we can often look at our experience. It's so raw because we haven't seen it before. We can think, oh, I didn't realize how big a mess I was in. What a mess. And we can be very unforgiving, very judgmental. But there's nothing we can do about that. They are the present. Our inheritance is just like this. So being judgmental and critical, self-critical, is just creating suffering. And in just noticing that is a great source of insight. Just noticing how we create suffering out of every moment, any moment, through our resistance to it. It shouldn't be this way. But of course, if it shouldn't be this way, it wouldn't be this way. The way it is exactly how it should be. It's just, of course it should be this way. There's nothing wrong with that moment. It's all we have. So if we think there's something wrong, if we just continually tell ourselves there's something wrong, then we'll never free ourselves from suffering, because all we do is create it over and over. So the beginning, the foundation of our meditation practice is accepting things the way they are. It's non-judgmental awareness. And then also you can say that the end, the result of our meditation practice is exactly that. It's non-judgmental awareness. It's accepting things as they are. So we could say that the beginning and the ending of our practice is no different. It's the same, just the same. And in that way we could say, well, why do we make it so difficult? Why do we create so many blind alleys to go down just to turn around and come back again to the same place that we set off from? A path of acceptance, of non-judgmental awareness. This is a path of kindness, of compassion, self-compassion. Of course, what happens is the very act of letting go of that judgmental mind is a present moment activity which conditions the future. So it's not like we're trapped in our past and there's nothing we can do. We're not trapped and we're not victims of our past. We've been the inheritors of it. And by fully acknowledging our present moment experience doesn't make us a victim of it. Because in the present moment we can let go of our resistance. we can train the mind. What happens is, when we start to practice, then we don't remember to let go very often. We occasionally do. When we notice, then what happens is we let go. Mindfulness is inherently a practice of relinquishment, because it's a stepping back from our experience, which requires us to let go. That's the space that we create that enables us to be aware. And the more we do it, the more we condition the mind to do it. It becomes a conditioning process, training the mind. Our habit is to grasp and reject, to the push and pull of the mind towards craving and towards aversion, is a mental habit. And we're replacing that habit by the habit of noticing, present moment awareness. So that noticing it at first is difficult and only a very occasional, but with practice becomes more and more available to us, and becomes the natural state of mind and time. It becomes natural to notice, just to be aware. Why? Just through the simple accumulation of habit, changing one habit to another. The habit of noticing rather than reacting to our experience means that we don't have to follow the grasping mind. The habit of grasping and rejecting, but becomes a habit of accepting. We notice, and so what do you get? If you don't follow wanting it to be otherwise, then this is what grasping is, and rejecting, it's simply wanting things to be otherwise, isn't it? So if we don't follow that, then we end up with accepting things as they are. That's what we end up with. It couldn't be anything else. So it just becomes a natural habit. So we're conditioning the mind. We're using the power of conditioning to our advantage. So it's not difficult or complicated, hard to do, but it just takes practice, time, a bit of practice, the habit. Get it, the habit of awareness. It's not I make it sound simple, and it's not so easy, but it's not an impossible thing. It's doable, and it's possible for anyone. Let's say, you want to train to be an accountant. At the beginning, you don't know anything about it, do you? And it seems like, it's going, how many years does it take to train to be an accountant? Yet every accountant started with nothing and ended up becoming a qualified accountant, and it took training, but they got there. It wasn't impossible. And it's the same with learning to play an instrument, and you begin with nothing, but with time and practice, and training, then it becomes possible, and everything's possible. I ride my bicycle. I don't ride it very often, and so when I come back home, I haven't been very far, but I'm really exhausted. I think, wow, this is really hard work. I've only been down the hill and back again. Yeah, if I did that more often, I would find I could go further and I wouldn't get so exhausted. When I got home, it would just be train it, the body to do that. And so I think I was talking to a friend recently. She was training to be an accountant. That's where it came to me, because she was asking my help, and I emailed her today, and I said, I thought I said, I think you'll make a really good accountant because you're interested and you want to learn. Now that but actually I also added, like anything. She could, she could be anything. If she wants to be an accountant, she could be an accountant, and uh, and it just takes a commitment and a curiosity and a certain interest, a willingness to be interested and curious, and then to commit to doing it. And we do these worldly things. We can do them without. It's not that hard. But to practice meditation, we think, oh, that's really hard, maybe. And yet it's no different. It's just a training of the mind. So this acceptance, and we're learning or training our minds so that we can accept ourselves, is an act of loving kindness and compassion, which is really worth more than anything else in the world. You couldn't, you can train to be an accountant, and what will it doesn't, it won't lead to be a nicer person. But this is a practice that actually transforms our lives. We seriously become nicer people. And it begins with that we do it for ourselves. We're not doing it to be nice to other people. We're doing it to transform our own lives, so that it leads to joy and a lot of gratitude. We realize that this works. But then it doesn't mean that we can't give that to others. So everything we learn, like we learn that we benefit from from accepting ourselves, we realize how that others would benefit. So we realize this is the greatest gift we can give to other people. So we learn that when we can accept other people as they are, that is a great kindness and great act of compassion. When we learn how to listen to our own inner dialogue and not believe it, not to buy into the judgmental mind, then we learn how not to judge others. We learn how to listen to others without judging them, without even necessarily believing the stories they're telling us. And what happens, we hear the cry of the world, if you like. We don't believe necessarily, when we say, how are you today? And they say, I'm fine. We don't necessarily believe that. We listen in a more intuitive way, to not necessarily believing the words that people say. We perhaps listen that bit longer and give them the silence, the space to tell us a bit more. And maybe they will tell us how they really feel. And that is a beginning of a relationship, isn't it? That when we establish communication, then we begin a relationship. So there are so many benefits of this practice, but it cultivates kindness, cultivates love, and it cultivates joy. And that's just such a gift, I think, to people. If we can do that, I think I'd like to open this up for a discussion. If anyone would like to unmute and share some observations, reflections, questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
James Moss.
Hi, James.
Hello. Hi.
You could speak up a little bit. Maybe it's me.
Sorry.
My volume's probably turned down. Let me see. Oh, I've got my volume turned down. That's fine. You're fine. Carry on.
I think when you're speaking about listening, when you ask, how are you? And they reply, I'm fine. Perhaps at the moment, on many of our minds, probably all of our minds, is the question is what happens when you ask, how are you? And they reply, I'm not fine. Whether they're Rohingya being beaten to death by Buddhist monks, or whether they're people in Ukraine, whether they're Russian or Ukrainian in Ukraine. When Thich Nhat Hanh is an activist in relation to the war in Vietnam, clearly there is accepting things as they are, but there is also taking on some sort of sense that one might try to bring about an improvement of how things are. And I wonder if you could perhaps, I'm not disagreeing with any of what you said, but I am also saying that it seems to me that if you listen to the world, you have to hear all the things the world says. And that's quite challenging.
Yes, that's right. Unconditional acceptance means willingness to listen to everything, doesn't it? You can't pick and choose. That's pushing things away, isn't it? And saying, oh, I'm not going to listen to that, that's upsetting me. But we can reasonably say, I've listened to enough of that's upsetting me. I've been upset enough today. I don't need any more. I did when I was... it's an interesting thing that you may mention it, because I do think that we can... it's okay to deliberately choose to be peaceful and not to listen to the news, to take that path of peace. But I don't think we should disregard it. When I was speaking to somebody, I rang somebody yesterday, I was concerned for them because I'd heard them talk about the Ukraine. In fact, they'd been listening to Russian media, and they were telling me, they were saying that they didn't trust what the BBC said and things like that. And I thought, what I was hearing was, I thought this was painful. This person's experiencing a lot of pain. And I wanted to speak to them. I didn't want to send them. I'd rather met them than but I spoke to them on the phone, because I wanted to find, in a way, just to communicate, to create a space. And I spoke to them, and I just thought to explore, let them talk out what they were trying to say, and let them talk out their frustration and their anger and their upset with everything in every way about what's happening. They were telling me all sorts of very... they're a very nice person, and they were telling me that they'd met some Russians and they told them this, but the Russians they'd met, and they'd said that they'd got friends in Ukraine, and they were really upset, and they he was really, I think I was at first, my first thoughts were that I thought he was suffering a lot. But then I didn't know. I didn't want to judge. I wanted him to just wanted to be willing to listen. So I listened to what he had to say. And at the end of it, I think it was fine. Whether he, in a way, I think it was good for us both, because what I'd heard from him, I felt, there's something wrong with what he's saying. I was felt he's been listening to Russian propaganda, and he's following some kind of path that was concerned me. But when I just, in a way, I didn't want that to spoil our relationship. So I thought, no, let me listen to it fully. Let me have that opportunity to hear everything he wants to say, so that there's nothing hidden, nothing assumed on my part. And then I just felt a lot better. He felt, I don't know, maybe he felt better too. And nothing came out of it. Well, we didn't fix anything. We didn't solve anything. But I was willing to listen, and I think that helped and made a difference to him, possibly. And it was, I don't know. So what can you do? I don't think you should shy away from things. I think we should listen to everything without without prejudging people. And I don't know if there's something we can do to help. That's good. But yeah, definitely don't. When I think there's a misunderstanding that happens when we talk about accepting things as they are. It is that we forget that we have choices, that we can make choices. And what we're doing when we say we're accepting things as they are, we're accepting the moment as it is, but we're not depriving ourselves of the choice of acting in that moment, the choice to in every moment to choose. We have choices that we can make. Far too many choices often. It becomes difficult, but we have choices, and we can choose something that we think is beneficial, or something that we think perhaps is just can't be bothered, just feeling can't be bothered. So we don't do anything. Maybe we do, maybe there are times when we don't do anything, but we have the possibility that we could do something good. And so those choices are there, and we can deliberately choose to do something that's beneficial, and why not? And if we could choose to do something harmful, and that sometimes happens, but those choices are available. So that accepting things as they are doesn't deprive us of choosing, making choices. Otherwise, as I said, we're just victims of how we are. There's nothing we can do. But we're not. We can choose. And the more clarity we have, the more willing to accept we are, the more willing we are to listen, the more open we are to the possibilities that of choosing what's wholesome and beneficial. And I used to I did quite a lot of work in the charity sector, and I used to often come across people who meant well but didn't actually they didn't know what they were doing, and they didn't really help. It didn't lead to a beneficial outcome. It was they meant well, but they didn't understand what to do. They just imposed what they thought was needed without listening to what people really wanted, to change that would have really been sustainable and beneficial. They didn't hear that voice. And so I think that there is a lot to be said for not just jumping in and thinking you know best and trying to fix other people's problems for them, but just to really to listen is probably the first step, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to do anything. Thanks, James. That was good, useful. Is that? You've probably got more you want to say, I don't know.
I suppose one way I might frame something I wonder about is if you take the 5 precepts, is that simply a statement of what I'm going to do for myself? But of course, I will not judge whether other people are acting in accordance with the precepts or not. And of course, I do understand what you're saying, and I think it's by no means easy to know what one thinks or feels, but I do think that there is some implication behind supporting what you think is moral behavior in others as well as in oneself. And that, to take your example of accountancy, which, if you become an accountant, you do have, I think, probably some obligation for making fitness to practice judgments about colleagues. If you believe that somebody is engaged in fraud, if you believe that if somebody is even simply dementing and no longer capable of doing the work, there is some sort of requirement to act, and the question of the nature of the action to follow, it's not easy. I'm not saying, well, of course you must stop them, or of course, but I'm saying it faces you with, it isn't simply enough to listen.
No, it's not. You have to act. You're right. And wow, isn't it wonderful if you can know what to do and act skillfully in the moment? Isn't that wonderful? It's a I often think that if we could know what it was, know what to say, what's the thing to say right now? What would it be? Because if we could, so often we can look back and think, if I'd only spoken up, if I should have said that then, and if I'd have said that then, wouldn't life have been simple? But it because I didn't say or act then so much time has passed, and it's so difficult to go back and to change that and to put that right. Of course, we think that way, but with hindsight, we can see, yes, obviously, that there are times when we should act, we should do, we can speak, and those opportunities are often missed. And so, wow, yes, but it takes wisdom, doesn't it, to know, and courage. And then to really to do that, I really think this practice does help us to do that. I had this experience when I went on a retreat, really a very, very, very long time ago. It was probably, I think it was about my second retreat, so it's probably 30 years ago, and more than that. And I had before, because I'm an accountant, so before I was went on the retreat, I was being asked to sign something, and it was the managing director, a person I worked for, who said, "Yeah, so you have to every year have to submit their P11D, so their expenses that are not allowable for tax." And so he knew what he wanted. There were things he didn't want me to declare, and so he wanted me to sign this form, and I didn't have the courage to say no, but I didn't sign it. But it wasn't urgent. I could leave it, and I went on the retreat. And during the retreat, I reflected on this, and I reflected to, so what's the worst that could happen if I was honest? Because honesty in that case would be to not sign. I couldn't sign it. So what would be the worst that would happen? So I brought that up in my meditation, and I realized that the worst that could happen was less important than being honest. So even though I could have lost my job and could have been impacted on my family, it was less important than living a lie. And I knew that I couldn't continue in that job if I signed that form. So when I came back from the retreat, I confronted him with it and said, I can't sign it. And he went absolutely ballistic. And so he said, and I'm going to speak to the auditor and get it sorted. Well, of course, the auditor said, of course you can't you can't make somebody sign something that's what could the auditor say? He had to agree with me. And so he ended up having to accept that. And it established a good basis for a relationship. And so I was able to stay in that job, which I would have had to leave if I had signed the form. I wouldn't have had a good relationship with him. So actually, the opposite was the fear that I had that I would lose my job was just turned around completely the opposite way. I was able to stay in that job for many, many years afterwards with a good relationship with the managing director. And that's such an amazing thing, isn't it? So I think, yes, we do need to stand up sometimes and say, this isn't right. Does anyone have any other questions?
To follow on from that. And I wondered where guarding the gates of senses would come, where you're just guarding the gates. You know what I mean by guarding the gates of the senses, compared to, as you say, looking. Thank you.
Can you just say that again? Because there was a little bit of noise when you were moving your...
You know, guarding the gates of the senses. Well, to me, that would indicate, actually, I'm guarding the senses. I'm kind of, I won't go there, because of wisdom, compared to, what you've been teaching tonight.
Compared to what I've been teaching, well, the difference between letting in and pushing away, but that there is also a place for, as you say, guarding the senses. So when I said you don't have to listen to the news all the time, so you've heard enough. Even when there are people that you can choose not to have contact, to choose not to take to their company. You can choose who you spend your time with, can't you? And input such as pornography, for example, you can guard against that. You don't have to. And so there are senses. We can guard the senses because we know cause and effect. If we subject our minds to content, certain content, then we'll get the results. the results, conditioned results, will have an effect. So in order to calm the mind, then why would we subject ourselves to things which are disturbing it? So if you were going on a retreat, we deliberately guard the senses in order to calm the mind. There is a war going on, but we wouldn't deliberately subject ourselves to a lot of news about the war that's going on when we're on a retreat. The purpose of the retreat is to calm the mind so that we can become clearer. The mind will become calm and clear. And so that's the opportunity that we have when we're on a retreat. So when I was leading the retreat last weekend, I didn't talk about Ukraine. I didn't give people a news briefing every morning or something like that, because it wasn't. I didn't think it was going to be helpful for people. And it was a way of guarding the senses. You don't have to be exposed the whole time to things which disturb the mind. So that's why I think guarding the senses has definitely got a place. But then there are, when you calm the mind, what happens is you get plenty of mental content coming up. You really don't need to go to the news for stuff to come up in the mind. And that's our opportunity to look at that and not to be resistant to it, to allow it to come up and manifest and allow it to come and go. Because if we do push things away, then we just give them more power and they'll just keep coming back. So it's an opportunity to train the mind to open and relax and let things in. That's how I see the. I hope that answered your question, Marjorie. Did it? Anyone else have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it was well, we are all very affected by this situation, and then well, there was another group of meditation that was suggesting to hear several monks that I didn't know, and that they, in different situations where there was war, they were bringing a lot of peace and like irradiating this peace and helping people. And I was thinking, well, but this is what we see in these monks is the fruit of years and years and years of practice on themselves. So sometimes we think, oh, maybe I can do that. But then we have to be a little bit realistic and say, well, but that's first I have to work and understand myself, understand the suffering, understand the restlessness and the judgmental thing. I imagine that Thich Nhat Hanh, I don't know, he started when he was so young. So by the time that he could lead other people is because he worked a lot in himself. So that's the reflection, I think, that we have to be patient and keep working on ourselves until maybe, who knows, at some moment we can irradiate that peace.
Because if we're impatient, then we grasp too much. We want the results. We grasp the results of practice before we build the foundation, the solid foundation from which to practice. It's like we try to build the pyramids from the top instead of building them from the bottom. We grasp good ideas and nice, like intellectually we grasp things which we haven't understood properly because we haven't understood them with the heart, but the mind's already there. So it's not really built on solid foundation. So that's why we have the benefit of the Buddha's teaching, talks about the Eightfold Path and, talks about understanding suffering because it's a basic building block, foundation stone, so it's so grounding, isn't it? To simply understand, to acknowledge and allow, to accept, to admit that there's suffering. It's such a foundation, such a basic foundation to build from. I said accepting is a foundation. It's two, even though it's ultimately where we end up. It's also the foundation of our practice. So we can accept where we are, where we're beginning from, just as much as where we're heading for. If we can accept, that's becoming more realistic with our practice, isn't it? So okay, I'm not there yet, but I'm just practice. Then we're not so self-critical, feeling like we failed, because failure is inevitable. It's something we should nurture, actually, rather than criticize, because it means we're trying. If we didn't try, we wouldn't fail. So don't worry about that. Don't, like when you're learning a foreign language, you have to keep making mistakes. It's okay. Otherwise, you'd never learn. So that's just the way of practice, is not to pretend or not to try to be somebody we're not, but to be who we are, but just to keep on learning and understanding, practicing bit by bit. Falling over, but picking ourselves up, carrying on. It doesn't matter. And we don't know how long this journey is, actually. We think, oh, I've got a long way to go. You can think that, but really, it's this journey's as long as we make it. We can, accept, it's not actually, as I said, accepting things as they are is where we begin. It's also where we end. So it's all here, right now. And when you listen to Luang Por Sumedho, you realize he keeps telling us we don't have to do anything to get there. It's all here now. And that's a beautiful teaching too. So we don't need to worry, create anxiety about a long journey. And maybe I've got a very long way to go. And we can also have an anxiety, oh, I should have started when I was younger. If only I'd started when I was 6, like some, one of these monks. But actually, that's not like that. We've all got our life experience we brought. Even if we come to Buddhism when we're, in our older, or even old age, we've brought all of our life experience with us. So we're not starting from nothing. So with that, hopefully encouraging ending, I think we should finish with the closing homage. The Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed one, I render homage to the Buddha, the blessed one. The teaching so completely explained by him, I bow to the Dhamma. The Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, I bow to the Sangha. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Have a good week.